For over a century after it was discovered, the wealthiest empires on Earth looked at North America and saw exactly one thing: a massive roadblock. They wanted a direct trade route to the spices of Asia, and this giant landmass was simply in the way. When Christopher Columbus sailed west, he was entirely convinced he could hit India. Instead, he bumped into the islands of the Caribbean Sea. He didn't find the spices he promised his financial backers, but he did find native populations and enough gold to keep the Spanish crown interested. Spain and Portugal drew a line right down the middle of the globe to divide trade. The Portuguese sailed around Africa to build a massive trading empire in Asia, while the Spanish conquered South and Central America, where the gold and silver actually were. Because the northern continent seemed completely devoid of immediate wealth, it was largely ignored. It was treated as a geographical dead end, while the real powers focused their attention on the southern hemisphere and the East Indies. The British arrived late to the party, waiting almost 100 years to seriously attempt colonizing the North American coast. But once they gained a foothold at places like Jamestown and Plymouth, the population exploded. Soon the East Coast was densely packed with over 1 million British colonists. Meanwhile, the French had been quietly claiming the vast middle section of the continent. By 1754, the borders rubbed together, and the growing British colonies teamed up with the British military to violently expel the French from North America entirely. They won the war, but Britain had spent a fortune to do it. The British government figured the colonies should help pay for the military protection they just enjoyed, and rolled out a series of steep new taxes to collect the debt. The colonists refused to pay taxes to a parliament where they had no vote. The political disagreement turned into an armed conflict, and on July 4, 1776, the Americans formally declared their independence. 5 years of fighting later, they won their freedom. But the newly independent United States was entirely broke. The government they created was a disorganized mess, essentially functioning as 13 separate, squabbling countries trapped on the Atlantic coast. The nation was failing fast, forcing the Founding Fathers to write an entirely new constitution just to keep the country alive. Once the new federal government was stable, a massive demographic engine took over. The American population was doubling every 20 years. The average family had 7 children, and all those people needed somewhere to live, driving an insatiable hunger for Western land. Over in Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte had recently forced Spain to give the Louisiana territory back to France. But Napoleon was planning an invasion of Britain and desperately needed cash to fund his war machine. So, for a bargain price of just $15 million, America bought the entire territory. In a single transaction, the young nation physically doubled in size. The momentum was unstoppable. In 1819, the United States bought Florida from Spain. Soon after, Mexico won its independence from Spain, and thousands of American settlers began pouring across the border into the sparsely populated Mexican territory of Texas. The settlers quickly outnumbered the locals, rebelled, and created their own independent republic, before eventually joining the U.S. This triggered a brutal war with Mexico. When the dust settled, the United States handed over another $15 million and took the northern parts of Mexico, securing a border that stretched all the way to the Pacific Ocean. America's appetite for territory became so aggressive that Congress actually passed the Guano Islands Act, a law allowing citizens to claim random, uninhabited islands in the Pacific, purely to harvest bird droppings for agricultural fertilizer. Through sheer demographic pressure, calculated cash buyouts, and one ugly war, a fragile coastal strip had conquered an entire continent in just 50 years. On paper, the country was thriving. Settlers were digging up gold in California and claiming vast tracts of free farmland in Oregon. But internally, the massive influx of new territory was tearing the nation apart. The northern states had outlawed slavery and increasingly viewed it as a moral evil. But in the South, the entire agricultural economy relied on enslaved labor. Every time a new state was added to the map, the political balance of power threatened to collapse. The arguments dragged on for decades until Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Convinced that Lincoln would abolish slavery entirely, most of the southern slave states seceded to form their own country. The resulting Civil War was devastating, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans and completely ravaging the Southern economy. By the end of the conflict, the North had won. Millions of enslaved people were finally freed, and the United States survived its continental expansion phase, remaining a single, unified country. Following the Civil War, the U.S. rapidly industrialized. But with no major land left to claim on the North American continent, the government looked outward, starting by purchasing the massive, icy wilderness of Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. The real test of America's reach came in Cuba. The island was fighting a war for independence against a collapsing Spanish empire. When an American warship sank in a mysterious explosion in Havana Harbor, the U.S. directly ordered Spain to leave. Spain declared war. The U.S. military quickly captured Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines from Spain. During the chaos of the conflict, the United States also officially annexed the Hawaiian Islands to secure a crucial naval base in the Pacific. In just a few short years, the United States had crossed a permanent threshold, transforming into a global empire responsible for governing millions of people across distant overseas territories. Following a presidential assassination, a young, intensely energetic Theodore Roosevelt took office. He wanted to flex America's newfound global power by building the second-largest navy in the world. But to move ships efficiently, he needed a shortcut between the Atlantic and the Pacific. When Colombia refused to let the U.S. build a canal through its territory, Roosevelt's administration ruthlessly backed a rebellion, helping Panama declare independence just to secure the construction rights. By 1914, the monumental feat of engineering was complete. The Panama Canal physically split the land connecting North and South America. With the locks open, a heavily armed American fleet could quickly move between oceans, allowing the U.S. to project military and economic power anywhere on Earth at a moment's notice. As the First World War began in Europe, the landmass that European powers once ignored as a geographic roadblock had bought, fought, and engineered its way into a global power, now wielding the world's second-largest navy and the most important strategic canal on Earth.